Hello, everyone. There's a look from our Unico U.S. Bancorp Tower building, downtown Portland. Good morning and welcome to AM Northwest. Yesterday, we heard the news that Jimmy Carter, humanitarian, Nobel Prize winner, and the 39th President of the United States, passed away at the age of 100. President Carter leaves behind a legacy of giving back, from his efforts to bring peace to the world to building thousands of homes for Habitat for Humanity. At the White House and across the nation, flags are flying at half-staff to honor the late president. In 1988, President Carter visited the AM Northwest studios to share his new book and his love of the outdoors. Now, almost 40 years later, let's look back at Jim Bosley and Mary Sterrett's conversation with President Jimmy Carter.
Good morning and welcome to AM Northwest with your hosts Jim Bosley and Mary Sterrett. This morning we'll talk live to former President Jimmy Carter about his new book, An Outdoor Journal. And now, live from the KATU Television Center in Portland, here are Jim and Mary.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Happy Monday to you, and welcome to AM Northwest Studio, full of people today.
Yeah, we're very crowded today, and for a very good reason. If you have a love for the outdoors and the sports it offers, you will be an eager reader and I'd say, very contented reader. In fact, one of the reviewers of this book, An Outdoor Journal, said of its author that he was indeed a very contented person, and a lot of it because of his outdoor life. Would you please welcome former President of the United States, Jimmy Carter.
Good morning. It's good to be with you.
Good morning. Welcome.
Glad to see you both.
A 9-year-old boy named Edgar Lane called me last week. 9 years old. Very proud that we were having you come to our state. He said, "What are you going to call him?" And I said, well, I'm going to call him Mr. President. I'm going to call him President Carter. He said, "Would you call him Jimmy?" And I said, no, not unless perhaps one day we were side by side on a bank snapping flies upstream in a river. When I was 9, Billy Zeller and Joey Albert were my friends. At about 9, we became Jim, Joe, and Bill. You were always Jimmy. There's a regional difference the way we looked upon, from Jimmy to Jim, that was a badge of honor. It's Jimmy in the South and Billy in the South, isn't it?
That's right. And this is the case with very old men. The South is the diminutive, Jimmy would be used. I'm actually James Earl Carter, Jr. My father was called Earl, and most people call me Jimmy. He called me Hot Shot when I was a tiny baby. This is a revelation on your television program. And only when he was angry with me did he ever call me Jimmy. He says if he shouted Jimmy, I knew that I had done something wrong. But ordinarily, he called me Hot. And so we hunted together, we fished together, we worked in the fields together harmoniously. It was always Hot. And my son is also named James Earl, and we call him Chip. And his son is named James Earl. We call him James. So we have a whole bunch of folks with the same official name, but with different things to call them. When I was running for president, I had a hard time in some states getting them to use Jimmy. We had to go to court in New Hampshire. They insisted on having James Earl Carter Jr. on the ballot. And no one knew who that was.
Who is that guy?
And they didn't want me to win in New Hampshire, by the way. So we had to go to court to demand that that I'd be known as Jimmy.
We were
but
so surprised.
Jimmy's fine.
We were so surprised when we heard that you were coming. And you were coming because you'd written a book about fishing. The two seem so incongruous. We always think of you in the Oval Office. We don't think of you, as Jim said, no. out on a stream fishing. And yet you have gotten so much solace and so much peace being outside, and you did it throughout your presidency. Yes. Why write a book about fishing at this point in your life?
Well, I grew up as a farm boy, in the woods, in the swamps, in the fields, alongside streams. It's been an integral part of my entire life. And when I was governor and when I was president, I didn't let those duties interfere with my outdoor experiences. So when I went to Camp David, for instance, on the weekends, there was a beautiful little trout stream just about 8 minutes down the mountain from Camp David, and we would slip down there and fish. And quite often, the last couple of years I was in the White House, we would land at Camp David. All the news media, the White House press corps would go back to the motel thinking that we were ensconced in Camp David to stay. We would change clothes, get back on the helicopter, fly out to Pennsylvania, and land in a meadow in a remote area and fish along in a creek called Spruce Creek. So I've always, you know, really cherished the outdoor experiences, the solace, the solitude, the personal challenge of the outdoors, even when I was in public office. But I didn't want that to be a highly publicized aspect of my life. And the book is not only about fishing and hunting, but it's about climbing mountains. It's about how to not to get lost in the woods. It's about the relationship between me and my father, the developmental stage of my life, about hunting and fishing with my next door neighbors, all of whom were black when I was growing up, and how my life was formed by this. And this is, I think, part of a lot of presidents' lives. There have been 8 or 10 presidents who were avid fishermen, including George Washington, and obviously people know about Theodore Roosevelt. But I mentioned this in the book, and Dwight Eisenhower and I fished in the same stream, not at the same time, in Pennsylvania. And so it's a chance wherever I go in the world, not only in this country. Last time I came to Oregon, I went steelhead fishing, had very good luck, by the way. But when I go to New Zealand or to China, or Japan, or Switzerland, or Wales, or England, you know, I always find a time to go fishing for half a day or a day.
When I fished with my father, that was tense fishing because I watched, one eye I was watching the fly, other eye I was watching my daddy. You had an experience with a string of fish one time. Remember, you kind of misplaced them or lost them?
Yeah.
Tell them what a string is if they don't know.
All right. Well, my father, I was his only child for 13 years, only boy. Billy came 13 years later. So Daddy would take me along when he went on a fishing trip with grown men. It would be 6 grown men, highly competitive as fishermen against one another, plus me. And we would fish in the southeastern part of Georgia, down in the Okefenokee Swamp, or in a river near Hortense, Georgia, called the Little Satilla River. And the way you fished then was to wade out in the stream about halfway, and had sand bottom, and fish against in the deep water against the outside bank. And I didn't wear a shirt or shoes at that time, but I would tie my fish string onto my belt loop. And one day, Daddy was in a hot competition with the other 5 men on who could catch the most fish, and so he gave me his string of fish. When you caught a fish, you put it on a fish stringer, and you tied the string onto your belt loop. And Daddy said, "Keep my fish very carefully, Jimmy," he called me Hot, "until I go in and see these other men, and I'll be back to get my fish later on. I think I'm going to win today." Well, I caught a big fish, and all of a sudden I realized that I didn't feel the pull of his fish strings. My fish had gotten loose because the belt loop broke. And my daddy did not abide mistakes. I mean, he was a very strict person. And I dreaded my father coming back and finding I had lost all his fish and mine. So when he came back, I was crying. I was about 10, 12 years old, and I was diving into the water downstream trying to locate these fish in the water. And Daddy came back and said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "Daddy, I have lost your fish." And I didn't know what was going to happen. So he said, "Why don't you come on out on the bank?" So I came out on the bank, and he looked at me for a long time, put his arms around me, and he said, "It's hot, we'll catch some more fish tomorrow." And I practically worshipped my daddy at that time. It was one of those great experiences. I spent a lot of time working in the fields with my father and working in the warehouse and very difficult manual labor, but the times that come back to me in the most glowing and wonderful memories of my daddy were the times we were out in the woods and fields together.
Did your children have the same kind of relationship with their daddy?
Well, in a way, but the fact is that when I started running for the state senate and then for governor and president, my boys were in the formative years. But even then, whenever they came home on Thanksgiving or Christmas, we would either go fishing or go out quail hunting or in the woods together, hunting arrowheads. And now I'm able to take my grandchildren fishing with me. One of the chapters in the book is when I took my oldest grandson fishing on the Copper River in Alaska. We caught some beautiful rainbow trout. And just this past weekend, as a matter of fact, we were up in Pennsylvania at Spruce Creek, and I had my second grandson, James, with me. He's become a very confident fly fisherman. So we, you know, it's a generational thing. You don't have to worry about getting too old to fish or being too young to fish. And I think those experiences are a way to break down any sort of barriers that exist among generations, or even across international boundaries. When I go to Japan or China and meet another fly fisherman, you know, we don't feel that there's any bridge between us that has to be crossed. You know, there's kind of a fraternity of fly fishers anywhere in the world.
Well, we're going to see if that fraternity of fly fishing does hold true in Portland, Oregon, because when we come back, we're going to see if Jim's daddy and your daddy taught you the same things, because Jim is going to get
Are we going fishing?
a lesson from Jimmy. We'll be right back. Mr. Carter, that is. Stay with us.
We're back with President Jimmy Carter, an outdoor journal, Adventures and Reflections. A great picture on the front. Where is that taken?
That's taken in Montana.
Was it?
Yes, sir, on the Boulder
really?
River.
Boulder River.
That's
I've been
right.
there. Now, in your hand, we've got ourselves a fly rod here. Is this a little long? That seems long. I mean, it seems like a long one to me.
For a big river or for heavy fish, that would be very good when you don't have anything to get in the way. On a small stream with a lot of brush overgrowing, you'd need a smaller rod.
Is that a right-handed or left-handed?
You can shift the reel around to
You
make it
can't
either
catch
way.
it. Good. Now, what do we have here?
This is a kind of a secret weapon that was given to me by a very fine supplier. It's a fly
It's a...
made out of deer hair that's shaped like a peanut.
Do they work, though? Have you ever tried anything?
Well, as a matter of fact, I haven't tried this one yet, but
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure it'll work, though.
Every fisherman has some favorite lure story.
Yes, that's right.
One or two. And you fished with, you know, Kurt Gowdy and some of the best sportsmen around the world. Do you have any good lure stories? It's one of these amazing things that everybody's catching nothing, and this guy over here is catching everything?
Yeah, the best, if I had to stick the rest of my life with one particular fly, it would be a small black ant imitation from dyed deer hair, which floats. This is a fly that works when other things won't work. Recently, my wife and I were fishing in near Winchester, England, in the Test and Itchen rivers, where Isaac Walton fished, you know, and where people have been fishing for 500 years. And all day we could see trout rising. Over there's a very strict discipline. You don't fish wildly. You only have to fish, you only can fish to a particular rising trout, one that's feeding. You wait very patiently. When you see a trout feeding, and you fly to him, and you fish upstream. Anyway, we had seen a lot of trout rising. We had given them everything that we had to offer, and even some that were furnished by the local guys, they didn't take them. And finally the guide, they call him Gillies, said, why don't you, what would you use in the United States if you couldn't catch fish on what you were using? And I said, well, I'd use a black ant. He said, we don't have anything like that in England. He said, why don't you tie on a black ant? So I tied on a black ant, and I fished for 6 rising trout, and I caught 5 of them. and his eyes bright. We released all the trout. I didn't keep it. But one of them weighed 3.5 pounds, a very heavy brown trout. And he said, do you have any extra black ants in your fly box? And I said, yes. So I gave him half what I had. I gave him 3. I kept 3. And I'm sure that the fish in the Itchen River have suffered severely because of the American-introduced black ant.
Can and have rather important decisions, perhaps even to this country, been made in a fishing hole by you?
Yeah, I think so.
Is that a time where things can happen?
Yeah, for instance, the few days before I went to Camp David with Begin and Sadat, my wife and I went down the middle fork of the Salmon River in Idaho on a float trip, casting for mostly cutthroat trout. And that's a time to clear your mind and to let you have, you know, very incisive thoughts. I didn't think about Begin and Sadat all the time, but I was, you know, it just put me in a proper frame of mind. And I think that kind of outdoor experience, no matter how pressing your duties are, liberates you from oppression and from frustration and disappointments and doubts, and kind of gives you a confidence in yourself.
There's nothing like standing on a bank sometime to have it all clear away and things come clear.
Absolutely.
Isn't that right?
Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to take a break. We'll be back with President Jimmy Carter right after this.
This morning on AM Northwest, we are visiting with former President Jimmy Carter. He is the author of 3 books and now a 4th, an outdoor journal Adventures and Reflections. It's about hunting and fishing. Good morning. What's your name?
Adam.
Adam, do you have a question for the president?
Yes. President Carter,
Yeah.
how big is the biggest fish you ever caught?
Ah,
Here's the story now coming, I think.
yeah, okay. I think I'll tell you the truth, Adam. Well, I've caught fairly large fish in the Atlantic Ocean, like baby tuna. But the largest fish I've ever caught in a freshwater stream was an Atlantic salmon that weighed 29.5 pounds. I was fishing with Kurt Gowdy, as a matter of fact, in the same boat with me. And Kurt Gowdy and I figured that I cast 11,000 times before I got the first bite from an Atlantic salmon. But that was a big experience. The biggest trout I ever caught was when I was fishing in Alaska a couple of years ago with my grandson, about your age. His name is Jason. And I caught a 12-pound rainbow trout in the Copper River. This is a river where you have to release all the fish. So what you do is the guide comes in and takes a close-up color picture of the fish and measures it, how long he is and how much around, and then we turn him back loose, and a taxidermist makes a fish that looks just like yours. And that's better than keeping the fish.
Good morning, you're on AM Northwest.
I'd like to ask President Carter, does he have some special names for some flies that he's tied and developed uniquely for himself?
Could I ask what part of the country you're from?
Southeast Portland.
Oh, I could tell by the accent. I could have said that. Go ahead.
I guess you already saw the peanut fly. I haven't tried it out, but I will try it out. Well, I used to tie a lot of flies myself, but then when it became known around the country that I was a fly fisherman, people send me their best flies. So ordinarily when I go fishing now in a strange area, I tie maybe a dozen flies, and people, when I get there, give me a lot of flies to fish with. There's one kind of a golden caterpillar that I used in Alaska for the first time fishing for grayling. Similar to what happened in England, the fish just wouldn't take the other guides' flies and the ones that had been used in Alaska a lot. But when I put my little golden-colored caterpillar on with a peacock hurled down the back, if you're a fly tyer, you know what I'm talking about, the grayling just ate that fly up. So if you go to Alaska, fish for grayling, make a little golden caterpillar and put a peacock hole down the back, you will have great luck.
Good morning, you're on AM Northwest.
Yes, I have a question for Jimmy Carter.
Yes.
Okay.
I saw an interview on The Tonight Show with Sam Donaldson, and he's covered quite a few presidents since he's been doing news, and he said that you were, out of all the presidents that he's covered, that you had the least sense of humor out of all of them. And he said one day that this was brought to your attention, and you were trying to be funny the next day, and it didn't work. And ever since then, you just stuck to your guns.
Oh, I see. It's hard to be humorous when you're dealing with somebody like Sam Donaldson. You know?
How do you get a word in with Sam?
It's hard
Sam
to do
is
it, yeah.
just so strong and just never stops
But an
shouting.
excellent reporter.
Yeah,
One of the
really,
best.
Really good. Good morning, you're on AM Northwest.
Good morning. I just have a quick comment for Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter, my grandson's name is Jimmy Carter, and when you were elected president, he was like in the 2nd or 3rd grade. And the next day at school, he sold his autographs for $2 a piece until he $20. And when my son found out about it, he made him return the money. So you helped my grandson on his way to making money.
Thank you.
That's
Mary?
great.
Mr. Carter, can you tell us what you're involved in right now? I understand there's a foundation that you are very much involved with. What causes are you still very passionate about?
Okay. Well, this is actually my 6th book. So I write, and that's how I earn a living, as a matter of fact. I teach at Emory University. I'm a university distinguished professor. I've just finished my 6th year teaching at Emory University. We have a Carter Center in Atlanta, in which I'm deeply involved in worldwide programs to alleviate hunger in Africa, to correct health problems, to deal with the promotion of human rights, U.S.-Soviet relations, arms control. We work very closely with the United Nations in the resolution of international conflicts or disputes. My wife and I, once a year, go out and build houses for homeless people in our country. This month, we'll be going to Philadelphia and to Atlanta with a group of volunteers. We'll be building 20 homes in 1 week in Atlanta for homeless people. Those are the kinds of things that we do and have a good life.